Now, chakra practitioners know this. The color orange corresponds to the sacrum. Out of 8 colors, 7 colors corresponds to the usual chakra systems, and orange corresponds to the sacrum. That's a little below the navel, and they call that the sacrum because it's Latin for the sacred, quote unquote, or the house of the soul. So this is essentially where your personality is. Now, it's a little interesting. If you look at that part of the body, you notice the intestinal tract looks like a giant brain fold. So you see that there's a bit of archaic thinking going on if you're an anthroposophist, meaning that you're modern Platonic and going too far afield now, but even if you're a layperson, you see things like the entire map of the universe looks like a map of the brain on a neurological level, or the shape of your ear looks like the shape of an infant, a fetus, things like that. Your fingerprint looks like the ring of a tree. There's these correspondences, in other words. So you'll notice that that part of your body almost resembles an ancient brain. And I would say that the kidneys would be, they would play an interesting role that I'll get to eventually. In a sense, they act as lubricants for the eyes. But anyway, we could talk psycho-spiritually, which means the effects that Libra and the color orange have on the soul, meaning the emotional effects, the emotional constitution, the disturbances, the balances. So medical astrologers know this, that the kidneys correspond to Libra. Now, there's something interesting about what nature does on certain amphibians or reptiles. It allows them to change colors on the skin on the surface of their bodies, and they do this for camouflage and self-defense. In human beings, we use art to do that. We use designs, camo gear, things like that. On the other hand, though, our bodies use color as a metric for health. So what I mean is that if a person's skin starts to turn red and hot, you'll say they have a fever. If their skin starts to turn green, you'll say that they have a stomach sickness, an abdominal sickness. This is the moon. This is the female planets, the moon, the Venus, and the Mercury. Virgo, Libra, and Cancer. Water, air, and earth. So all those elements work in the lower body. And Libra has a particular function that's very comical in the face of popular notions of beauty. The kidneys function to excrete. They release excrement. So their entire goal is to clean. And you can get an idea of that just how you see the body turn color when it starts to get sick. You see metal turn color when it gets quote unquote sick. It starts to orange. It starts to rust. Now logically we know that we can, we derust it. But on a spiritual level, we're seeing an illness of metal. And the answer to that illness is to clean it. And that's the function of the lower body of the human being, is to clean the body. Evacuate the fluids and the substances that are degenerative, deteriorating, and corrosive. Now, if you go out and you pee in the same spot for a year, you're going to turn that grass from green to brown. That's not psychological transference, that's spiritual transference. Because the color of your urine is affecting the color of that part of the earth. And the same, you know that you're in a bad spot if your piss is orange, you've been holding it in too long. So psychospiritually, emotionally, some disturbances that Librans face is criticism, the critical attitude, the repression of criticism. The people who are false, overly nice, overly pleasing. The people who are overly critical. Everything is worthless. Everything is cheap. Everything's devalued. In the mundane world, the aspects of life that fight against progress, that try to erode progress, and for lack of better words, shit and piss all over it. This is where Libra in the worst light represents pissy people, pissy attitudes. Sharp people. This is the aspect of Libra, in one sense, where she takes exaltation from Saturn, the planet of death, in one light. In another light, she's a grain goddess. And we know that grain isn't that good for us. Carbohydrates are filling, but they're too filling. They fill you with air, emptiness. And they actually can be bad for the bones in that sense, because the bone has marrow. It's not just air. It needs earthy substances. And this is all Paracelsian thinking, medieval thinking, as far as Platonism and health. And it's super important to recognize these different facets of Venus and Libra, because you can color code this to honey calcite, to citrin, in your health, in your meditations, and so on, in your invocations, so that you can transform this pissiness and this criticism and this tightening and this slashing grip. You can transform it into its opposite, which is adoration, unbiased admiration, objectivity, an attention to beauty, and an appreciation of beauty for beauty's sake, not for ego's sake, would be the better psychospiritual expression. Now, going back to the excrement value of Libra and the kidneys and this part of the body, there's an interesting correlation between creatorship and humanity and shortcoming. I'm reminded of a story that I learned about in my amateur psychology research days. of an experimental psychological institute that took on patients months at a time. And there was a woman who shared a story with the viewers about how during her break, her coming together point was when they allowed her private space in her room, and she went hog wild. She went barbaric, and she excreted all over the place. She pissed and she shit, and she, it's disturbing, but this is an aspect of healing, is that she came back, she was holding her shit, she's throwing it at the wall, and she starts painting with it. I don't know how that fixed her, but she came back to us and she told us in this documentary that this was her healing point when they let her do that. And there's this interesting psychological parallel between our human shortcomings and our creatorship, where we try, in a funny way, as Terence McKenna would say, to turn shit into shinola. We try to take the the least aspects of ourselves and impose them on the world. And in the best light, we transform them into good qualities. And this would be akin to the sublimation aspect of Freudian psychology, is that we try to transform these shortcomings into useful talents, into art, the human being. And this goes back to Saturn's exaltation of Libra, and that Saturn is the master of invention, the tool maker, and that we use tools as handicaps to help us in the world. And Libra has this handicap that it's the force of the desire to create, to make art, against the shortcoming of humanity's ignorance, the lack of knowledge, the lack of truth. So we create these imitations of life, and they're supposed to heal us or speak to us. And of course, we do this on a simple level, all human beings, sometimes in the ambivalent scale of enforcing our attitudes and perspectives on others rather than expressing them. Now, I add Virgo to this because Virgo shares a space in the abdominal, in the sacrum, as the intestinal tract. As I said earlier, you might notice that the intestinal tract looks like a great brain fold. And one of the ways that you cure thought is through curing the pH balance of the intestinal tract, or of the human being. As I said, through alkaline foods. Because in today's world, we live in a highly acidic world. Now, let it be known that we still have generations that came out of the Pluto and Libra experience, which is a decades-long experience of corrosiveness. And let it be known that society has deteriorated like holes in a shirt. Everything around us is imitative, artificial, acidic. The sodas, the sprays, the chemicals. So we are in an end times world, and it's not the planet or the sphere that you would think. It's not Mars and Pluto. It's not Scorpio. It was Libra. Or rather, it was Pluto and Libra. So we're both right. But Virgo shares in this as the fixer-upper, the organizer of the body, and that's what the intestinal tract does. It segregates objects of the body, nutrients and excrement. It organizes that. It picks up the nutrients and leaves out the excrement. Now, in Greco-Roman mythology, there's the correspondence of Mercury and Venus, and we call that Hermaphrodite, Hermes Aphrodite, and this is the man and woman. And in astrology, we know that Venus and Mercury are always in proximity to each other via the sun, the location of the sun. And we also know that Virgo and Libra sit together in the zodiac wheel. We don't often think of the color code that they share, and we don't often think of the feminine energy that they share and the space that they share. In other words, why is it that Libra and Venus have the symbol of the girdle, the chastity, the clam, when Virgo is the virgin? And you'll see that they're the same entity under different conditions. Something to think about.